The best commentaries from the last video.
I always thought I was a good judge of character. I had built my life on trust, hard work, and the belief that love, real love, was meant to last. When I met Alice, she was everything I had ever wanted in a partner: beautiful, kind, supportive. She carried herself with grace, spoke with warmth, and made me feel like I was the luckiest man alive. She had a son, Nick, from a previous marriage, or so she told me. A tragic story, really? She said Nick's father had died in an accident when he was just a child, and since then, it had always been the two of them against the world. It was touching, really. I respected her for her strength, for how she had raised him alone, and I admired how close they were. Nick was 19 when Alice and I got married. He was polite, if a bit reserved at first. I didn't want to push too hard, so I gave him space. I wanted him to feel comfortable, to know I wasn't there to replace his father but to be a supportive figure in his life. I paid for his college tuition, got him a car, and made sure he had everything he needed. At first, things seemed normal. Alice and I had a great relationship, and Nick slowly warmed up to me. We'd have dinner together, go on family vacations, and I truly believed we had formed a real bond. But then, little things started to seem off. It was subtle at first, small things I could easily brush off. The way Nick looked at Alice sometimes, a look that felt far too intense for a son. The way she would smile at him, laughing a little too much at his jokes, touching his arm in ways that felt too familiar. I ignored it. What else could I do? But then, it started getting harder to ignore. One night, I came home earlier than usual from work. Alice and Nick were in the kitchen, laughing, whispering about something. The moment they saw me, they both stopped abruptly. It was strange, but I didn't question it. Maybe I was just imagining things. Then, I started noticing how often Nick would sit too close to Alice on the couch, how he'd whisper in her ear when I was in the room. How she would spend hours alone with him in his bedroom, the door locked. She always had an excuse, helping him with school, talking about his future, just mother-son bonding. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe I wasn't seeing what I thought I was seeing. But then, the real warning signs started appearing. One evening, Alice went out with some friends, and Nick was home alone. I was in my office, catching up on some work, when I heard his phone buzz. He had left it on the coffee table. I wouldn't have checked, but the preview caught my eye. Alice, I can't wait to be in your arms again tonight. I froze. My heart started pounding in my chest. My hands felt numb as I reached for the phone. I unlocked it. Nick had never bothered to change the password from the default one Alice set for him. I scrolled through their messages. The words I read made my stomach churn. This wasn't a mother talking to her son. This wasn't innocent. This wasn't normal. It was a full-blown affair. My wife wasn't just cheating on me, she had been lying to me from the very beginning. Nick wasn't her son. He was never her son. He was her lover. And I had been nothing more than a fool financing their twisted little fantasy. I sat there, staring at the phone screen, my world crashing down around me. I had dedicated years of my life to this woman, to this so-called family. And all along, I had been nothing more than a paycheck, a cover for their disgusting secret. I gripped the phone tightly, my breath shallow. My mind raced with a million thoughts. What do I do now? Confront her? Confront him? Pretend I never saw it? No. I couldn't let this go. They thought they had played me. But the game was just beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes I saw the messages, the words my wife had sent to the boy I thought was her son. My hands itched to grab my phone and call her, to scream, to demand answers. But I didn't. Instead I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking. By the time the sun started to rise, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to explode. I wasn't going to let them see me break. If they had spent years playing me for a fool, I was going to make sure they paid for it. I got out of bed, showered, and dressed like nothing had happened. I was calm, eerily calm. But inside, I was a storm waiting to unleash itself. Alice came home a little after 7 in the morning, looking exhausted but satisfied. She didn't expect me to be awake. She paused in the doorway, surprised. "You're up early," she said, setting her purse down. I smiled at her, sipping my coffee. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd start the day early." She walked over, leaned down, and kissed me on the cheek. My stomach twisted, but I didn't react. "You okay?" she asked, tilting her head. I nodded. "Of course. Just a little stressed from work." She bought the lie without hesitation. After all, I was the trusting idiot who had believed every word she had ever said. Nick walked in a few minutes later, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He was wearing nothing but sweatpants, his toned chest on full display. He didn't even seem surprised to see Alice home so early, and that only made my blood boil more. I forced myself to smile at him. "Morning, kid." He grunted in response and went straight to the fridge, pulling out a bottle of orange juice. Alice watched him, a small smile on her lips. I noticed how her eyes lingered on him a little too long. She thought I was blind. I clenched my jaw but forced myself to remain neutral. This wasn't the time. "Actually," I said, setting my mug down, "I was thinking maybe we could have a family dinner tonight. Just the three of us." Alice and Nick both looked at me, surprised. "That's a great idea," Alice said, smiling. "It's been a while since we just sat down together." Nick, on the other hand, looked hesitant. Yeah? Sure." I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes, but he quickly masked it. Good. I wanted him to be uncomfortable. Because tonight, I was going to start tearing their little world apart. The day dragged on, each hour feeling like an eternity. I pretended everything was normal, going through the motions of my usual routine. But inside, I was calculating every move. By the time evening rolled around, I had everything in place. Alice had set the table beautifully, as if this were some happy family gathering. She had even put out candles. The sight of it made me sick. Nick sat across from me, tense. He wasn't stupid. He could sense something was off, even if he didn't know what. I poured myself a glass of wine, swirling the liquid around slowly. "So, Nick," I said casually, "how's school going?" He shrugged. "It's fine." I nodded, taking a sip. "That's good. And your love life? Any girlfriends I should know about?" Alice choked on her wine, and Nick stiffened. I smirked. "Gotcha." Alice recovered quickly. "Babe, don't embarrass him." She laughed nervously. "You know how kids are about that stuff." "Kids?" I gritted my teeth but kept my face relaxed. "Of course. Just curious, that's all." Nick stared at me, his jaw tight. He knew I was pushing. He just didn't know how much I already knew. I let the silence stretch before I leaned back in my chair, exhaling dramatically. "Actually," I said, setting my glass down, "I found something interesting last night." Alice's fingers tightened around her fork. Nick's eyes flickered with something. "Panic?" "Oh?" Alice asked, trying to sound casual. "What did you find?" I tilted my head, studying her. "Nick's phone. He left it on the table. And, well, curiosity got the better of me." Nick's entire body went rigid. Alice let out a nervous laugh. "Babe, that's an invasion of privacy." "Maybe," I admitted. "But I'm glad I did." The room fell deathly silent. Alice placed her fork down carefully. "Brian." I ignored her. My eyes were locked on Nick. "You've been a busy boy, haven't you?" Nick swallowed hard. Alice tried to intervene. "Whatever you think you saw." "I didn't think I saw anything," I interrupted, my voice calm but cold. "I know what I saw." I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. One tap, and the screen lit up. Nick and Alice's messages. Dozens of them. Explicit. Alice's face strained of color. Nick's fists clenched. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "So tell me, Alice," I said slowly, "do you call all your sons baby?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. Nick pushed his chair back, standing abruptly. Sit down. My voice was ice. He hesitated before sinking back into his seat. Alice opened her mouth again, but I cut her off. Save it! I glanced between the two of them, shaking my head. How long? Either of them spoke. I slammed my fist on the table, making Alice jump. How long? Alice's eyes filled with tears. Brian, please. Answer me! I roared. She flinched, looking down. Since before we got married, she whispered. My whole body turned to stone. Before we got married. I had been a joke to them from the very start. I nodded slowly, swallowing back the rage bubbling in my chest. All right. Alice looked up, confused. What? I stood, adjusting my suit. I said all right. Nick narrowed his eyes. That's it. I smirked. For now. Because I wasn't done with them yet. Not even close. The air in the room was thick, suffocating. Alice and Nick sat frozen, their faces pale, their bodies tense. They expected me to explode, to scream, to lash out. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled. Not the kind of smile that comes from joy, but the kind that sends chills down your spine. I wanted them to feel the weight of their betrayal. I wanted them to realize that whatever twisted game they thought they were playing, I was about to turn the rules against them. I pushed my chair back slowly and stood up. You two enjoy the rest of your meal, I said, my voice eerily calm. Alice blinked. Brian, please, I held up a hand, silencing her. I'm not interested in your excuses. Not now. Nick, the arrogant little bastard, leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. So what, you're just gonna walk away? You can't handle the truth? I chuckled, shaking my head. Oh, Nick. I leaned down, placing both hands on the table, locking eyes with him. You don't realize it yet, do you? He frowned. Realize what? I tapped my phone, still lying on the table. The screen flashed again, displaying the long thread of messages between him and Alice. You think I only found the texts? I whispered. You think I didn't dig deeper? Nick shifted uncomfortably. Alice's hand covered her mouth, her eyes wide. She knew. She understood. I had more. I straightened up and grabbed my phone, slipping it into my pocket. Don't worry, I said. I'm not going to do anything, yet. Then, without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving them sitting there in stunned silence. Back in my office, I locked the door and took a deep breath. My hands were shaking, my pulse racing. The rage inside me was barely contained, but I couldn't lose control. Not yet. I sat down and opened my laptop. It was time to go deeper. A few days passed. I barely spoke to Alice. She tried multiple times to talk, to explain, to plead. Each time, I shut her down. I need space, I told her. I need time to process this. In reality, I needed time to plan. Nick was quieter than usual, probably because he didn't trust that I wouldn't do something drastic. He avoided me, which was fine. It made it easier to work without distractions. I hired a private investigator. Someone discreet, someone who specialized in digging up dirt. If Alice and Nick thought I had caught everything, they were sorely mistaken. I wanted more. I wanted everything. 2 days later, I got a call. I think you're going to want to see this, the investigator said. I met him in a small diner across town. He handed me a thick folder and a USB drive. Everything you need is in there, he said. Hotel receipts, surveillance footage, financial transactions. It's worse than you think. I opened the folder and felt my stomach twist. Photos of Alice and Nick together in different places, holding hands, kissing, disappearing into hotels. The timestamps went back years. Even before we were married. I clenched my jaw, flipping through the pages. Then I reached a section labeled bank statements. Alice had been funneling money, my money, into a separate account under a fake name. Tens of thousands of dollars gone. It was no longer just about betrayal. It was theft. Fraud. Deception at a level I hadn't even imagined. I looked up at the investigator. "Can you find out where she's been sending this money?" He nodded. "Already did. Some of it went to renting apartments. But the rest? It was funneled into an account that belongs to Nick." I laughed bitterly. "Of course it was." "Thanks," I said, standing up. "Send me everything digitally as well." As I left the diner, a new plan began to form in my mind. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to ruin them. That night, I came home late. Alice was waiting in the living room, looking miserable. "Brian," she said softly. I sighed and sat across from her. "Alice," I murmured, shaking my head. "Why?" Her eyes welled with tears. "I never meant to hurt you. I—" "Stop," I interrupted. "I don't want excuses. I want the truth." She swallowed hard. It started before I met you," she admitted. "Nick and we were together for a long time. But when I met you, I knew you were the perfect man, stable, successful. You could give us the life we wanted." I laughed coldly. "So you used me?" Tears streamed down her face. "At first, yes. But then, I did love you, Brian. I do." I shook my head. "You don't love me, Alice. You love what I provided." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Nick is not your son," I said flatly. She hesitated, then nodded. "No." I leaned back, exhaling slowly. "So this entire time, you've been playing me for a fool?" She sobbed. "I didn't mean—" I said. "Stop," I snapped. Silence. Then I sighed, rubbing my temples. "We're done, Alice. But I'm not just walking away." Her breath hitched. "What do you mean?" I stood, staring down at her. "You'll find out soon enough." Then I walked out of the room, leaving her in terrified silence. The next morning, I made my first move. Step 1: freeze the accounts. Alice had no access to my money anymore. Every joint account was shut down, and I moved my personal funds somewhere she couldn't touch. Step 2: eviction notice. Nick had been living in my house, eating my food, driving my car. Not anymore. Step 3: public humiliation. I gathered every piece of evidence: the messages, the bank records, the hotel visits, the surveillance photos. Then I sent them. To her friends. To her family. To her coworkers. To Nick's college administration. And just for good measure, I made sure to send an anonymous tip to HR at Alice's job. Workplace relationships were strongly discouraged, and guess what? One of the hotel receipts showed that she had booked a room during a business trip, using company funds. Let's see how she liked losing everything. I sat back in my chair, watching the chaos unfold. Alice's phone rang off the hook, calls from her boss, her friends, her mother. Nick stormed into the house, shouting, "What the hell did you do?" I smirked. "I leveled the playing field." Alice was sobbing, her world crumbling around her. Nick clenched his fists. "You're ruining our lives." I stood up, stepping close to him, lowering my voice to a whisper. "You ruined mine first." Then I turned my back on them, walking away as their perfect little fantasy burned to the ground. And I didn't feel a single ounce of regret. I woke up the next morning to chaos. Alice's phone hadn't stopped ringing since last night. I could hear her in the living room, sobbing, trying to explain herself to her mother. Nick had stormed out after our confrontation, but I knew he'd be back. He had nowhere else to go. My revenge had only just begun, and I wasn't done watching their world crumble. I got dressed, feeling lighter than I had in years. For too long, I had lived in the illusion of a happy marriage, pouring my love and money into something that had been nothing more than a con. Alice had played me. Nick had mocked me behind my back. They thought I would just sit back and take it. They were wrong. By noon, I received an email from my private investigator. Attached was a video, security footage from one of the hotels Alice had booked. I played it, my hands steady, my expression cold. There she was, walking in with Nick, their hands tangled together, their lips meeting as they reached the elevator. No hesitation, no guilt, nothing that even resembled shame. I saved the file. This was just another nail in their coffin. Alice tried to talk to me again that afternoon. She approached carefully, her eyes red, her body trembling. Brian, don't. I cut her off. I leaned against the counter, studying her. You're not sorry. You're sorry you got caught. She shook her head furiously, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. I made a mistake. I laughed. A mistake? No, Alice. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill. What you did was calculated. You lied to me for years. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. The sight of her disgusted me. Please, Brian. I'll do anything. I narrowed my eyes. Good. Then get out. Panic flashed across her face. What? You heard me. Get out of my house. She looked around desperately. Brian, I have nowhere to go. Not my problem. I snapped. You should have thought about that before crawling into bed with him. She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. I felt nothing. The woman I had once loved was gone. This person in front of me? She was just another liar who had finally run out of tricks. Nick showed up that evening, his face twisted with anger. You ruined everything! He shouted the moment he walked in. I smirked, leaning back in my chair. No, Nick. You did that all on your own. He clenched his fists, shaking with rage. You had no right. I stood up, cutting him off. I had every right. This was my home. My money. My life. And you used me. Alice appeared behind him, her face pale. Brian, please, let's just talk. I scoffed. We're way past talking. I grabbed a folder from the table and tossed it onto the floor between them. That's an official eviction notice. You have 3 days to get out. Alice gasped. Nick kicked the folder away. You can't do this. I smiled. Watch me. Nick turned to Alice. Do something. She shook her head, defeated. We don't have a choice. I let out a breath, savoring the moment. Oh, and Alice? She looked up hesitantly. You might want to check your bank account. Her eyes widened. She grabbed her phone, frantically typing. Then she froze. Her face turned ghostly white. Where is my money? I took another sip of my drink, enjoying her terror. Gone. Nick turned on me. You son of a... I cut him off with a sharp laugh. Don't be mad at me. Be mad at yourselves. Alice dropped her phone, her body shaking. How did you? You think I wasn't paying attention? I leaned in, my voice cold. I gave you everything. And you took it all for granted. Nick's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. He looked like he wanted to lunge at me. I almost wished he would. Instead, he turned to Alice. Let's go. She hesitated, her eyes still locked on me, searching for any trace of mercy. She found none. Nick grabbed her arm, dragging her toward the door. We'll be fine without him. I watched them leave, my heart steady. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. The house was finally silent. No more whispers behind my back. No more stolen glances between them. No more pretending that I was part of some happy family. I stood in the doorway, watching as Alice and Nick disappeared down the street with whatever they could carry. No car, no money, no place to go. Just two liars walking straight into the mess they had created. I closed the door and locked it, exhaling slowly. I should have felt relieved. Victorious even. But something in me still burned. This wasn't over. Not yet. I grabbed my phone and called my lawyer. Send the divorce papers today, I said, my voice calm. And make sure she doesn't get a damn penny. It's already in motion, he replied. But Brian, with the fraud charges you're pressing, She might not even have time to fight for anything. Good, I muttered. I want her to know that everything she took from me is gone. I want her to feel it. After I hung up, I poured myself a drink and sat down in my office. I stared at my laptop screen, scrolling through the documents I had collected. Bank statements, text messages, hotel records. It was all there, every disgusting detail. A part of me wanted to just move on, to let them rot on their own. But another part of me, the part that had been humiliated, betrayed, used, wanted more. Nick had come into my home pretending to be a son. Alice had played the perfect wife while sneaking around with him. They had taken advantage of me in every way possible, thinking they would never be caught. They thought they could walk away. They were wrong. That night, I sent an email to Nick's University Administration. Subject: Urgent information regarding student conduct. Attached were all the records of his financial scams, selling cars he didn't own, promising goods he never intended to deliver. I detailed every fraudulent transaction, every instance where he had lied to people and taken their money. The school had a strict zero-tolerance policy for criminal activity. If I was lucky, they'd expel him by the end of the week. Next, I sent another email to Alice's employer. Subject: Unauthorized use of company funds. Alice had booked hotel rooms using her corporate credit card, claiming they were for business trips. I had the receipts, the timestamps, and the proof that those trips had nothing to do with work. By morning, her career would be over. I leaned back, sipping my whiskey, staring at the city lights outside my window. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice. Alice and Nick wanted to play games? I was about to show them what losing really felt like. The next morning, my phone buzzed earlier than usual. I smirked before I even looked at the screen. Alice, 17 missed calls. I ignored them. Instead, I checked my email. 2 new messages. The first was from Nick's University Administration. Mr. Carter, thank you for bringing this to our attention. The information you provided is currently under review by our disciplinary board. Given the severity of the allegations, Nicholas Reynolds has been placed on immediate suspension pending investigation. We appreciate your cooperation in maintaining the integrity of our institution. Suspended. Not expelled yet, but it was only a matter of time. The second email was from Alice's company's HR department. Dear Mr. Carter, we have reviewed the financial discrepancies related to Mrs. Reynolds' corporate expenses. Effective immediately, she has been placed on unpaid leave while an internal investigation is conducted. Your cooperation has been noted, and if further legal action is required, we will contact you accordingly. Perfect. Alice was jobless. Nick was out of school. And both of them were now scrambling to hold their pathetic lives together. I stretched, feeling lighter than I had in years. They had spent so much time thinking they had control over me. But now they were the ones losing everything. My phone buzzed again. Another call from Alice. This time I answered. Brian, she gasped the second I picked up. Please, we need to talk. I swirled my coffee, enjoying the sound of desperation in her voice. Oh? About what? She sniffled. You got me fired. I pretended to think. No, Alice. You got yourself fired when you started stealing from your company. Damn it, Brian. I have nothing now. She screamed. You've taken everything from me. I laughed coldly. Welcome to my world. Silence. Then, in a softer voice, she tried again. Brian, please. I made a mistake. I stood by the door for a moment, listening. Alice didn't leave right away. I could hear her sobbing, her breath hitching between desperate gasps. Nick muttered something to her, something angry, but I couldn't make out the words. Then, after what felt like an eternity, I finally heard their footsteps fade down the driveway. I let out a slow breath and turned away, walking back into the house, my house. For the first time in years, it was finally just mine. No more whispers. No more stolen glances. No more being made a fool in my own home. I poured myself a drink and sat down in the living room, staring at the blank TV screen. I should have felt victorious. And in a way, I did. I had stripped Alice and Nick of everything they had taken for granted. Their comfort, their security, their future. But there was one last thing I needed to do. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer. "Brian," he answered after one ring. "I was about to call you." Alice's lawyer reached out. I smirked. Of course, she had tried to fight back. "Let me guess," I said. "She's trying to get alimony." "She was," my lawyer said with amusement. "Until I send over the fraud charges, the bank statements, and proof of her infidelity. They went quiet after that." I laughed. "So she knows she doesn't have a case." "She knows," he confirmed. "The divorce will be finalized within the week. You're walking away with everything." I exhaled, finally feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. "Good. There's more," he added. I raised an eyebrow. "What now?" "She's leaving town." That caught me off guard. "What?" "Apparently, after losing her job and being blacklisted by her industry, she's got no choice. She and Nick are packing up. Rumor has it they're heading to some cheap rental a few states over." I let out a low chuckle. "Running away, huh? Looks like it." I leaned back, sipping my drink. It was fitting. Alice had spent years building a perfect life for herself, only for it to crumble into nothing in just a few weeks. And now, she was doing the only thing she could. Escaping. "Let them go," I said. "They're not my problem anymore." The lawyer chuckled. "That's the spirit." We hung up, and I sat in silence, letting it all sink in. It was over. Alice was gone. Nick was out of my life. And I had everything I needed to move forward. For the first time in years I was free. And I intended to enjoy every second of it. A week passed, and just like my lawyer had said, Alice and Nick were gone. No more calls, no more emails, nothing. It was as if they had never existed. I had expected to feel something when I heard they had finally left town, relief, satisfaction, maybe even pity. But all I felt was nothing. They were dead to me. That evening, I sat out on the patio with a whiskey in hand, staring at the darkening sky. The quiet felt different now, lighter, easier. No more waiting for the next betrayal. No more pretending. Just me, my house, and a future that was finally mine again. I checked my phone. A single unread message from an unknown number. "I hope you're happy. You ruined our lives." I laughed. "Nick." Of course, he'd try one last time to get under my skin. I typed back 2 simple words. "Good. Enjoy." I blocked the number before he could respond. That was the last time I ever heard from either of them. And I never lost a single night of sleep over it. 2 months passed, and life had never been better. My divorce was finalized, my accounts were fully restored, and the house, once filled with lies and betrayal, finally felt like home again. I had thrown out every trace of Alice and Nick. Their clothes, their pictures, even the damn coffee mugs they used. Every reminder of them was gone. And with each passing day, I felt lighter. One evening, as I was finishing up work, I got a call from an old friend, David. He had been one of the few people who had warned me about Alice years ago, but I had been too blind to listen. "Man, you have got to hear this," he said the second I picked up. I leaned back in my chair. "What now?" "It's about Alice and Nick." I smirked. "They still alive?" "Barely," he laughed. "You really did a number on them." I took a sip of my drink. "Go on." "After you cut them off, they tried to make it work in that dump of a rental," he said. "Didn't last. Nick got kicked out of school, so his whole successful future went down the drain. And Alice? She couldn't find another job after the fraud charges got around." I chuckled. "Let me guess, she begged her family for help?" David snorted. "Oh, she tried. But remember how she cut off most of them when she married you?" "Yeah, turns out they weren't too eager to take her back." I grinned. Karma had a way of handling things beautifully. So where are they now? I asked. That's the best part, he said, barely containing his amusement. Alice and Nick had a falling out. Guess once the money ran dry, the whole twisted little fantasy couldn't hold up. I raised an eyebrow. You're telling me they turned on each other? Oh, big time, David said. Word is, she blames him for everything. Says if it weren't for him, she'd still have her perfect life. Meanwhile, he's pissed at her for lying about you having no proof of their affair. He thought he'd get away with it. I laughed, shaking my head. Unbelievable. They split up a few weeks ago. He continued. Nick took off, somewhere out west, no one knows. Alice? Well, let's just say she's not exactly thriving. I smirked. How bad is it? She's broke, man, David said. No job, no friends, no reputation. She's been bouncing between shelters. I exhaled slowly, letting the information sink in. The woman who had betrayed me, humiliated me, used me, reduced to nothing. I should have felt bad. I really should have. But I didn't. She had made her bed. And now, she was rotting in it. I ended the call with David and sat there for a moment, letting everything sink in. Alice was homeless. Nick had disappeared. The perfect little life they had built on lies and deceit had completely collapsed. And me? I had everything I needed. My money. My house. My future. And most importantly, my peace. I raised my glass to the empty room. To Karma, I thought, smirking. The next few weeks passed without another thought about them. I focused on myself. I hit the gym, reconnected with old friends, even started casually dating again. It felt good to be free. Then, one evening, I was leaving a restaurant when I saw her. Alice. She was sitting on the sidewalk, wrapped in a thin, dirty jacket, clutching a small paper cup in her trembling hands. Her hair was unkempt, her face hollow, her once expensive clothes reduced to rags. For a second, she didn't notice me. Then our eyes met. Her breath hitched. "Be Brian," she whispered. I stared at her unmoved. She looked pathetic. The woman who had once strutted through my house like a queen now sat in the cold begging for scraps. She forced a smile, her lips chapped. "I was hoping I'd run into you." I said nothing. She swallowed hard. "I messed up," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I lost everything. Nick left me. I have nowhere to go." I tilted my head. "And that's my problem because—" Her eyes filled with tears. "Please. I just need a little help. A place to stay. Just for a little while." I let out a slow, deliberate breath, then crouched down to her level. "Tell me something, Alice," I said, my voice calm. "Did you think about this moment when you were sneaking around with him? Did you ever stop to think what would happen when I found out?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I smiled coldly. "No, you didn't. Because you thought I was weak. That I'd always be there, no matter what you did." She sobbed. "I was wrong." I stood up, adjusting my jacket. "Yes, you were." For a brief second, I saw it, the hope in her eyes. She thought I would forgive her. That I would take her back. That I was still the fool she had once manipulated so easily. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. Her breath caught as she watched me slide out a crisp $100 bill. I held it up between two fingers, watching her eyes widen. Then, without a word, I dropped it into the nearest sewer drain. Alice let out a broken gasp, scrambling toward it, her fingers desperately clawing at the grate. But it was gone. Just like her chances. I turned my back on her and walked away, my footsteps steady. She screamed my name, sobbing, begging. I never looked back. And I never saw her again. For the first time in years, I was truly, completely free.